Thank you. Village Administrator?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to prepare myself here because I have a PowerPoint this evening to talk about an event, some issues, an area in town that needs some understanding, and that is the Prairie View Shopping Center. Where we're at, where we've been, where we're going, and just to give some idea about that, there's a lot of questions that always come up about that center. Actually, it's risen to a point where we've actually had freedom of information requests regarding this, and we thought we would bring forward information about the current status of that center. So bear with me for a few seconds as I light up the projector. That one easier than expected. What I'd like to do this evening is just talk about the center, talk about actually lead off with the focus of village effort generally from the standpoint of economic development, but then again more specifically to the Prairie View Shopping Center, and some background, current status, and ongoing effort. Just got to hit it in the right direction. So the focus of village effort, certainly from stimulating economic development, is to enhance the community in its vitality through creative growth solutions. And those solutions are in all phases of the village as far as bringing economic development. But this evening we'll focus mostly on the Prairie View Shopping Center. Through this evaluation and effort, we do a prudent analysis of village financial support for redevelopment agreements, or generally support just from a staff standpoint for economic development, and then measure, certainly from the financial aspect, the return on investment that the village would have if funds were placed in a redevelopment agreement. I knew I was going to go the wrong way. So background, Prairie View Shopping Center. The property has been owned by the same family for over 40 years. The property is debt-free, providing the owner with significant return even with vacancies. In 2012, the owner offered to develop the center, but only with village support. In that case, and at that time, a TIF district was created for the shopping center. The initial request was for $10 million in net present value, or approximately $18 million in cash value, with no specific plan. The village would not respond without details, and that aspect kind of lingered for a while to determine what kind of support would be given. And certainly, as I indicated in the beginning, analysis is important. What type of return will we have for the cash or money that we would put forward? And if you look at net present value, I'll just give a quick 2-second understanding of that. Net present value would be indicating that $10 million would be the value today, but most of these situations are done over a period of time, and there is a percentage put on it, usually 5%, sometimes 6%, sometimes 6.5%. In this particular case, 6.5% was placed on this, and it's like a loan. And the actual cash payout over a period of time, and that has to be determined, but usually it's in a decade format, would escalate that net present value of $10 million to actually $18 million in cash value. And you'll see where that is information that is interesting to understand and appropriate to understand as we talk about current situations with the Prairie View Shopping Center. In 2014, the owner informally requested financial support to secure a national grocer or retail chain. After lengthy negotiations and much effort by the village, and I'd have to say by the owner, to reach a tentative agreement for a substantial support from the village. However, no formal proposal was ever submitted. It was just an understanding toward a redevelopment agreement, but then the retailer declined to proceed. So at that point in 2014, that major grocer did not proceed on the site based on terms or based on whatever occurred during the negotiations. And during 2016, the owner and the village entered into negotiations for another national grocer. No formal proposal was actually submitted. because the grocer declined to proceed after months of effort and their evaluation of the site. But certainly the village was heavily involved in those negotiations and extremely supportive to make sure that that desire of the residents and the community was, no stone was unturned to make sure that that had the possibility of occurring. Then on December 22nd, 2016, the owner contacted the village, specifically myself, seeking assistance for redevelopment, which would include new construction of the center, which was rather exciting, and the following tenant mix. Unfortunately, this is all I can disclose to you about the tenant mix, because actually the proposal was only on 2 sheets of paper, and that was the extent of the proposal. One was a mere shell of a floor plan, or actually a plot plan, and the other was the financial request, which I'll summarize in the next cells. But moving forward, what I can tell you is they were looking at a discount clothing store, a junior department store, a craft store, a health club, and we would assume that was LA Fitness on a new site, a pet store, and an independent grocer. Then also in the outlots, with no real specificity, there was a coffee shop, fast food, and service tenants. And then the existing bank on the corner at the intersection would remain and in the building that it's currently in, because it's in rather good shape. But now we come to the finances of that. The owner requested $9 million of net present value at 5% from the village. And that we'll talk about what the real dollars are associated with a $9 million net present value as we move forward. What that represented was 100% of the TIF increment for the site to go to the developer for the next 20 years. That would be until 2037. Additionally, they looked for 100% of the local sales tax, less $200,000 per year, which would be the return to the village with no increase and a flat amount over 20 years plus. Actually, they were looking for 2037 plus an additional 5 years. And then the next option, which inclusive of all these, was 20% of the local option sales tax for 20 plus years. And they needed staff's recommendation of this proposal based on the slim information we had by January 30th, 2017. So as we continued on February 8th, 2017, we waited a little time. We had some dialogue in between, but it was very difficult for us to determine exactly how to respond to this without more detail on the tenant mix. So we did respond and indicated that we needed more detail regarding the tenant mix, and we indicated that 100% of the TIF increment for the 20 years would be considered for recommendation, as TIF is to be used to redevelop a site, and that's the purpose of TIF, is to redevelop a site from an infrastructure standpoint and to improve the site. So that seemed reasonable to us. However, getting into our sales taxes, and those are certainly needed to support our general fund and our infrastructure, and also to control our property taxes, we needed more detail to make any commitment from that aspect. As usual, analyzing it to support these critical revenues for the village. Then on February 13th, 2017, the owner reduced their request for assistance to $7.5 million and required village response by February 17th, with no additional detail as far as what these specific amenities would be and the mix of the proposed tenants. So we took a look at this and said, what's the return on this? What's the cost of this? What's the impact of this? And as we look back, they had not really changed their scheme for obtaining the money, and that was 100% of all TIF increment for 20 years. And that means $6.5 million in net present value, with a net present value of $3.6 million. So the real cash is $6.5 million over the 20 years. And then the local sales tax option with the anything annually over $200,000 for 20 plus years would be $5 million with a net present value of $2.8 million. and then the local option sales tax, which we projected based on what we thought would be the return with our consultants. All of these are projected based on sales for similar type described tenants to determine what kind of sales we could expect. And the local option sales tax, they were requesting 20% of that for 20 plus years at $1.7 million or a net present value of $1 million. So in summary, the owner was requesting 56% of all revenues collected by the village to go to the owner over the next 20 years. So if we take a look at this, these are some substantial dollars, and to make these types of decisions without specific information and without community vetting became difficult for us. And we take a look at the totals. The total request is $13 million or a net present value of $7.45 million. And once again, we were pretty much looking at maybe 3 pieces of paper at this point and no real evidence of what was coming into the process. So that, as you can see, the time frame was tight, the information was slim, and the request was large. So at this point, the village staff's concerns were that we didn't have enough information regarding the grocer. We already have some limited grocers in the community. We didn't want those to be impacted by something same or similar, but we needed more detail of the specific grocer and what we would be receiving to make our analysis appropriate so that we were meeting the desire of the community while getting the best return on our investment. Also, we needed detail on the tenants relative to their compatibility with the community's desires. So in the underline there, we requested more detail. Also, to vet for the TIF assistance, kind of a complicated process. We need to understand where those dollars are going to go so that we can report back to the board, we can report back to the citizens, we can report back on the annual report to the TIF committees. And we needed a formal submittal. And to thus far, over the many years of interaction with the Prairie View Center, and certainly going back to 2012, they have never submitted a formal application for what they would do with the TIF assistance. And finally, we looked for time for project vetting by the community and asked for at least an additional request of 60 days at a minimum. And certainly the mayor was involved in what was occurring at this time, and he wanted to make sure that enough time was presented so some vetting with the community could be accomplished, some understanding with the community could be received, and if appropriately developed, an opportunity for a town hall meeting even where the developer looking for this large of an investment from the village could be vetted and understood with elevations, what the site would look like. We had some discussions with the developer, and what they showed us pictures of and told us to go look at was a nice looking, well-constructed brick structures that would represent a contemporary shopping center, and we're very comfortable with that. But it's certainly important to understand from an elevation standpoint the full complex of how this would look, how buildings would shift on the property, how the outlots would mix in, how the approaches would be accomplished, and we received only one plan review 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at this time. So on February 21st, 2017, the village administrator, myself, advised the owner's agent more information and time was needed to properly vet the request. The owner's agent replied in his response to their proposal would be considered as no by the owner based on our request for additional time and additional information. I asked a couple times and the answer was the same. If that's your answer, that you want time and information, we will consider your answer to be no. So, what will we do? What is our ongoing effort? Well, we'll continue to bring opportunities to the owner, grocers, retailers, entertainment, hotel, along with prospective purchasers and partners for the property. So let me just go back on that. We have brought these forward, and they've been coming forward for a considerable amount of time, and most of them fall short on the developer or the owner's intentions, and in some cases, calls from these potential opportunities are not returned, which give us some credibility issues when those calls aren't returned and aren't followed up on, and we're trying to mine and bring forward opportunities for this vital corner in our community. So the project that we're looking at, the project must be what the community desires: grocery, restaurants, lifestyle center amenities, and a sustainable retail investment. While we do not control the type of permitted development, it's in our code, but what's in the code, even if it's special use, is a permitted use as long as it meets the standards. So if it meets the standards, we won't reject it, but we must control the valuable dollars of the village, and it must be appropriate for us to provide any financial support, because that'll impact the village through 2037. So you can build what you desire, you can bring in what you desire, but we will only support and provide funds that there's a good return on investment for the village, because this is a long-term project. It's difficult to even look at 2037. That's 20 years from now. It'll be here before we know it, but at this point, that's a long time for us to think about things, but we are prepared to do that if the right information is provided. So the focus of this effort ongoing is we're going to continually evaluate and provide proposals. Any proposals that are presented to us, we're going to vet them, we're going to do due diligence, and we're going to provide a cost-benefit review. So, the quality of the review without time constraints is another concern, that this is a big investment for a long time in the community, and to be shackled with some short period time for response is very difficult for us to do, and it's unfortunate that we received a no when all we asked for was more appropriate information to protect our residents and some time to gather information from our residents. So our ongoing effort towards this is a win-win outcome, as it requires communication, creativity, and balanced cooperation. So in summary, we look at the village investment must match a return to our residents. That was a lot of information, and it was a lot of time, and I'll have to tell you it was a lot of effort by staff, because there was a lot of time that went into not only interior staff, but also consultants that we have that are specific to redevelopment like this, who provided us on short notice, on continual notice, the returns we needed, but we have to say we were comfortable with our response because we were uncomfortable just saying yes.
Any questions or comments from the board? Trustee Thill? Trustee
Yeah,
Greer?
Your Honor, I wouldn't mind, Ralph, there was, like Trustee Thill said, it was great information, which we're well aware of, but I think it's great that the residents have a feel of that situation. One thing I would like to comment, even though that is is the largest shopping mall that we have, just for the residents' information, just the Harlem and Shermer, certainly not as large, they went through a complete rehab with no assistance from anyone. So, you have to look at all of the angles why we initiated a TIF in 2012 to be able to help jumpstart this property. And now I look at these other shopping malls, and many of them had facelifts, and I just think of Harlem and Shermer, with the Tava restaurant and that, everybody where I'm talking about.
Lenore Plaza, Harlem and
Right.
Dempster, you mean, right?
Exactly. They did a beautiful facelift with no assistance from a village, and I think that's also important to have a note.
Yeah, I think you make a great comment there, and we do reach out to Washington Commons and both shopping centers that are east and west of Harlem at Dempster, and provide kudos to them because predominantly all we've provided for them is guidance and support, and their parking lots are full, and the return on to the village is very high, and the service level that we provide, while commensurate with the busyness of the center, is supported by the sales taxes and property taxes that they do present. And those centers were actually brought up to the Prairie View owner and their agent as models of what can be done in a community with cooperation, counseling, and guidance, and not just merely village hard-earned dollars.
That's right. Anybody else? I do want to thank Ralph, not just for this report, but also all of our staff and the owners as well. I mean, there's been a lot of time and effort into this. Believe me, this is probably the most frustrating thing that I've encountered as being the mayor of this village. However, the bottom line, as Ralph said, and it's a great, we always use it, it's got to be a win-win. And when you come and ask a village and ask our residents to come up with $13.2 million, and all I had and all Ralph saw was 2 sheets of paper, one a pro forma that it looked like an 8th grader wrote, the other one a sketch of that took 10 minutes to draw and said, this is what we want $13.2 million for, these are the stores we're bringing you. It's not going to fly. It doesn't fly. So if I sound a little jaded right now, it's because I'm very frustrated with this owner. And I thought it was appropriate, especially in the lieu of what happened in the last 2 weeks, for this owner to understand that my residents are going to give us input, and we're going to work at our pace and our speed to get this done where the village will prosper and get what we want. Like Ralph said, we have other malls that haven't asked for a dime. They have all national retailers. So, again, I know it's frustrating, but I do think things will happen here. I do think things are going to pop here. And I do think that waiting a little bit longer and doing what staff has done, and Ralph, I commend you for it again, we're going to get results there, but it's going to be a win-win for this village. So I hope the owner understands that we are here for business. We're here, as we are for all our businesses, to support them, but we're not here, we're not the First National Bank of Morton Grove. We're the Village of Morton Grove. And again, Ralph, thank you for all the time you've put into this, and I don't think this is the end of it, but it was appropriate, I thought, for your report as this just came to fruition here in the last 2 weeks, that they're now going to their Plan B. So, thank you. Anything else, Ralph?
No, not at this time. Thank you very much for your support, and if anything changes, we'll certainly bring it back to the board and to the residents.
Perfect.